Welcome to Never Again Is Now, a podcast about anti-Semitism. I'm Evelyn Marcus.
And I am Phyllis Zimbler-Miller.
Today we will discuss the war in Israel from the perspective of somebody who has roots in Gaza. Yasmin Mohammed is a Canadian human rights advocate, especially for freedom from religion. She is the founder of Free Hearts, Free Minds, a nonprofit that provides mental health support for members of the LGBT community and free thinkers living in the Muslim world. Her book, Unveiled, is about her experiences growing up in a fundamentalist Islamic family who married her off to a member of Al-Qaeda. Yasmin hosts the podcast Forgotten Feminists, and she is co-director of the Clarity Coalition, an organization of Muslims, ex-Muslims, and others who stand for liberty for all. Yasmin, it's a huge honor to have you on our show, and thank you so much for coming on, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. It is a real honor for me to join you. I really appreciate the invitation, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Great. So, Yasmin, can you tell us what the land of Gaza means to you personally?
So my father was born and raised in Gaza. He left when he was 18 to go to university in Egypt, and that's where he met my mom. And my mom and dad got divorced, and I didn't really have much of a relationship with him when I was younger. But when I got to be in my 20s, the relationship with him got to be a lot stronger once I was, my mom wasn't the gatekeeper of that relationship anymore. And my connection to Gaza is really just through him. So he was a huge advocate for peace, and he had a YouTube page, he had a Facebook page, he was constantly involved in different, conferences and peace walks and all sorts of activities where he really felt that it was important that the world know that Hamas is not the face of Gaza. Really, that was his biggest concern. Is he was horrified and embarrassed and angry that a terrorist organization would be the face of his homeland to the world. And so he worked alongside, ambassadors, people like Bassem Eid, other peace activists from Palestine that were also interested in, a two-state solution, freedom, equality, and peace for both Israelis and Palestinians. And so, so my connection to Gaza is really directly through him. I've never been to Gaza. He wanted me to go. He really tried to encourage me many times, but I never did go.
No.
Was there a reason why? I just want to know why you didn't want to go.
Well, Phyllis, this brings it. Now I'm going to have to bring in sort of, I had a lot of resentment towards my dad because growing up with my mom was horrible, to say the least.
Are we talking about Egypt, that you grew up in Egypt?
No, born and raised in Vancouver, Canada. And I was resentful that he didn't protect me. And so it was, I feel really guilty about this now, which is why I'm being outspoken about this now, is because he's passed away. And I feel so much guilt over what I think now was just really immature of me to choose to not care about his cause, because I felt like, well, you never cared about me. Why should I care about what you care about? And so even though I was, we were on our way to having a much stronger relationship, you know, when you're in your 20s and you're meeting your dad, it's like he's not really your dad at that point. He's more like a friend or, you know, cool uncle. And I had a lot of respect and love for him, but I also carried a lot of resentment. And I think that's really what prevented me from, you know, wanting to take on the Gaza cause with him.
So how do you feel? How does this war now affect you personally?
You know, I think that it's affecting everybody personally right now. It's unfortunately brought a lot of the darkness to the light all over the world. You know, because even though I'm not a Muslim and I haven't been a Muslim for almost 20 years, the fact that I work with a lot of people who are from the Muslim world, from the Arab world, with my organization, Free Hearts, Free Minds, with my podcast that you mentioned, Forgotten Feminists, or just personal friends that I have, there has been a lot of, I can't even say discussions because they're not really discussions. They're just like angry outbursts because of where I stand on the issue, and other people completely disagree and they stand in different places. And so it's meant that, you know, I've had to lose many friends since October 7th. And I know that that's, you know, a small price to pay. I'm speaking to friends of mine, you know, members of my board at Free Hearts, Free Minds. I'm speaking to them when they're in bomb shelters. My vice president is telling me about members of her family that she's lost. So, you know, losing friendships is nothing in comparison. So when I say it affects me personally, it's obviously not to the same scale that it's affecting other people personally, especially people that are in Israel right now or that are in Gaza. Obviously, you know, the people whose families have been devastated by the murders or the kidnappings. But, you know, in the book that I wrote, the subtitle is How Western Liberals Empower Radical Islam. And for all these years, I have been trying to sort of repeat that over and over again, point to different things and try to get the West to see the mistake that they're making in allowing the Islamist ideology to fester and grow and get stronger. And whenever anybody tries to point to it or criticize it, they're called Islamophobic, they're called bigoted, they're called racists. And so the people that are yelling fire are the ones that are demonized as opposed to the arsonists. And so when this all started to come to light, and immediately after October 7th, you saw people in the streets celebrating Hamas, you saw Black Lives Matter sharing images of paragliders and talking about resistance and freedom fighters and all that kind of thing. It was like, oh, this is it. This is the subtitle of my book has like leapt off the pages and is now, you know, in the streets of Sydney, Australia, screaming "Gas the Jews," you know, like now we can see it. Now we can see what I, amongst many other people, have been trying to say for so many years, but we were told it was an irrational fear. And now people can see, you know, the darkness has come to light. Now the question is, what are we going to do about it? Now that we see the problem that we have, that everybody wanted to bury their head in the sand and didn't want to acknowledge it, now they have no choice but to acknowledge it. So how are we going to move forward from here? That's the big question. So I think we're at a very pivotal moment.
You know, I know Evelyn has another question, but I just want to emphasize, because as an American citizen, I think what you said is so important that I think it needs to be even emphasized. Could you say the subtitle of your book again, and literally just talk for a couple of minutes, because I know exactly what you're saying, but I'm not so sure that our audience does. And it's so important. I'd like you to say it again, if that's okay.
Yeah, the subtitle is How Western Liberals Empower Radical Islam. And the way that they empower it is by making excuses for it and by silencing the people that are victims and the people that are oppressed by radical Islam. And instead, they empower the Islamists, you know, whether it's billions of dollars that are being put into Ivy League universities, whether it's, you know, the campaign funds that are coming from Iran and, you know, paying for different, you know, members of Congress and even your vice president, or even down to when I tell my own personal story of when I went to the courts through one of my teachers facilitated this, and I went to family court and spoke to the judge and told him all about how horrible my home life was and how my, you know, the man that my mother had married, how he was treating us and how he was beating us. And I was told that that's your culture.
Yeah.
That's your culture. That's
Cultural
the way
relativism.
it is.
Cultural relativism.
Exactly. Yeah. So what they're doing there is they're so concerned and they're so worried about, you know, maybe offending a Muslim person that they're willing to leave the victims unsupported. And I mean, that's just my story, but expanded, you can see the Rotherham gangs in the UK, for example, when there were journalists or politicians or all sorts of whistleblowers that tried to talk about what was going on, they were silenced because they were Pakistani men that were leading these rape gangs. And so that was considered racist and Islamophobic. And so they're constantly protecting the most radical, the extremist, you know, the people that are doing horrible things are the ones that are being protected versus the people that are being victimized by them, because they're the ones that have the power.
And I just want to point out, I think, a problem with language. There's a really good article in the Wall Street Journal opinion piece talking about the difference, but it's because the words sound so close between Islam and Islamist. And could you just clarify for people, because, you know, if you don't hear that IST at the end of the word, and there's a huge distinction that you're making, and I would like our listeners to understand.
Well, you know, sometimes it is a huge distinction and sometimes it isn't. So when I, you know, for example, when I was forced into a marriage, when I was forced into a niqab, when I was forced to accept being beaten, when I was forced to accept being raped, all of that was in Islam. All of that can be justified by the Quran and the Hadith. However, Islamist refers to somebody who wants the whole world to be Muslim, wants to establish a caliphate, and wants everybody who isn't Muslim to either convert or be killed. So that's the groups like Hamas, you know, Hizb ut-Tahrir, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, you know, the list goes on and on. So there are Islamists, but Islamist just refers to the political ideology, which obviously is a very big problem. But I believe that the religion of Islam has many problems as well.
Thank you for that clarification, because yes, I have read statements. I mean, I know about Islam's about killing the Jews, but still, I think that we need to understand when people if they are using the different terms correctly, whether they're talking about the religion or talking about a theory that the whole world needs to be Muslim. We seem to have lost Evelyn for a minute. I will ask her a question, though I kind of think that you answered it, in that, well, you explained that your father and mother, how your father thought about Israel and Jews. What about your mother? How were you brought up in that respect?
So my mother is very different from my father. My father was very secular. His love for Gaza was just because it's his homeland. He never had any sort of religious justification for why Jewish people should or shouldn't be on the land or anything like that. He felt like just pragmatically, it just makes sense for all the people there to be able to share the land. Like there's no reason why that can't just happen. Whereas my mother is a student, or was a student, of Al-Azhar University, which is a very prestigious Islamic university in Cairo, Egypt. She has a master's degree in Islamic studies. She was the head of the Islamic studies department at the Islamic school that I attended. So she is what I call a born-again Muslim. She was quite secular when she met my dad and when she married him and throughout their marriage. But afterwards, when she ended up marrying the second guy, she got pulled into that same trajectory as everybody else around the early 80s. And then it just kept growing in the 90s of everybody just becoming much more and more, Islamism was rising, starting with the Iranian regime. And then it just spread all over the Middle East and North Africa, this idea of political Islam. So her heroes were people like, Hassan al-Banna, who started the Muslim Brotherhood, Yusuf Qaradawi, Sayyid Qutb, just her Islamist, heroes. And so I grew up from her side, having really, just religious justifications for being anti-Semitic. She was very, not just her and my mosque that I attended, the school that I attended. When I lived in Egypt for a few years, I saw it there as well. And in Qatar, when I lived there, she's with the other side of the coin, opposite of my dad, where she just had nothing but hate and contempt for all Jewish people. And she's one of those people that would mask it with saying, oh, it's just Zionists when she's in public. But the truth is that she hates all Jewish people.
How did you turn out the way you did? I know that sounds weird, but
no, it doesn't sound weird at all. And it's a really good question. And I think that I was very lucky in that even though I lived in like a bubble of Sharia, closed off from the rest of the Canadian society, I was still in Canada and I still had access. She had 3 kids. She was a single mom to 3 kids. So she still let us watch TV and movies. And that allowed me to see a world beyond my own and to kind of gave me something to strive for. And so I've always been a very curious person, and that's always been punished. In Islam, especially if you're a girl, usually Muslim girls are raised to just do as they're told, to just listen. There's this idea of the long, straight path, which is really like a tightrope, and below the tightrope is the fires of hell. So if you don't walk very, very carefully along this tightrope, if you misstep, then you're going to hell. And so I was like living in that fear and anxiety, my whole life, until I was forced into a marriage with a terrorist who my mother chose because he was strong enough to control me, as she put it. And when I was married to him, I ended up having a daughter. And so once I had a daughter, and, when you hold your little girl in your arms for the first time, and you're just you feel like such overwhelming love and a desire to protect them and for them to never feel anything but joy and happiness. And I never wanted her to feel fear or anger or sadness. And so I just did not want her to live the same life that I had lived. So she was really the catalyst for me getting away from him, getting away from my mom, getting away from this very controlling world. And then once I was out, the very first thing I did was go to university, because I was never allowed to question. I was never allowed to think. I was never allowed to be a critical thinker. And so I was just so excited about the prospect of higher learning, which I never, like, anytime I would bring it up before, my mom would laugh at me. She'd say, like, what do you need an education for? Are you going to get a job? You just need to know how to cook and clean and obey your husband, keep your mouth shut. That's all you need to know how to do. So when I was in university, I took a history of religions course, and the course was going to focus on the 3 monotheistic religions. And I honestly only took it because I thought it would be an easy A. I thought, well, a third of this course, with all of the Islamic studies that I've taken in my life, because it was really important that we do well in Islamic studies, because we can't dishonor our mom, right? So I knew I'd have a third of that curriculum down. And so I just thought, okay, it'll be a quick elective. I had no idea that it was going to completely change the trajectory of my life. The prof was a man who grew up Lebanese Christian, and he knew how to talk to me. And I kind of trusted him, I think, maybe because he was Arab and he understood my culture, and he could see me sitting there in hijab, and he knew how to talk to me. And also 9/11 happened in that year as well. So that was pretty, that really bombards you both intellectually from taking this course, and then emotionally from 9/11 happening, and then seeing the celebrations when you go home or in the mosque or, within the community at large, just the way that people were jubilant over what I thought was so horrific and so tragic. And I was so repulsed and horrified that I would be associated with the people that would do this. And it was extra for me too, because there was at one point, at that time when they were just like following bin Laden from bunker to bunker in Afghanistan. So there was one of those times when there was a BBC correspondent, he's got his helmet on and all of his gear, and he just reaches over and picks up a random piece of paper out of the thousands of papers flying around the room. And he picks it up and he reads it. And of course, it has to be the name of Assam Marzouk, his address, like the man that they forced me to marry. So the company that he had started in Richmond, BC. And so I couldn't leave my house after that. Like, the journalists were all in front of my door. They're wanting to understand, like, what is my connection to this man who is connected to bin Laden, who just did this, in New York City. And so that was like even more reason for me to feel even extra horrified, because I'm actually being connected to this. And so, I'd gone through so much to pull myself and my daughter out of that world and to get us away and to start university. And it was haunting me, it came back, and it was, I really just needed to break free from all of that. And so by the end of that year, I knew I didn't want to be Muslim anymore. But it's a very scary thing to do, because the punishment for renouncing Islam is execution. And that doesn't necessarily have to be held, delivered by a court or anything. That could be done by any believing Muslim. And so it's scary. I wanted to protect myself. And first and foremost, I wanted to protect my daughter, because he's a member of Al-Qaeda, and I didn't know where his friends were. And if he's going to send them to come and get her, I was more worried about them kidnapping her than I was about them, like, if they were going to just kill us both, I probably would have been more relaxed. But I was so worried that they were going to kidnap her, take her back to Peshawar, and, indoctrinate her into that world and everything. But I was contacted by CSIS, who are the Canadian CIA, and they showed me pictures of him behind bars in Egypt. And they told me, you're safe, you're okay. And so, it was a really scary time. My book will outline it all. There's a lot of ups and downs and different things. But honestly, if not for the flap of a butterfly's wing somewhere, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today. So I'm really grateful to have gotten out.
And
Thank you so
I'm
much,
really
Yasmin.
grateful for sharing it.
Right. That's what I just wanted to say. And you're such a hero in the personal decisions that you made and steps you took steps that are so easy for most people in the West and so almost impossible to make for people from your former community, the Muslim community, even if they live in the West. And I'm very grateful that you shared this with us, and I know that you also described it in even more detail in your book. Is there any connection between what you have experienced and just told us? Is there any connection to what to the conflicts between Israel and the Palestinians, Israel and Gaza, Israel and Hamas, what just happened? You mentioned 9/11. Is there any connection? Do you see any similarity or connection with October 7 and how and what also what Jews have to endure these days almost everywhere in the world?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I think it's all connected. I think that, 9/11, October 7th, Charlie Hebdo, Samuel Paty, we could go on and on and on listing all of the different terrorist activities that have been carried out by, extreme Muslims all over the world, first and foremost in Muslim countries against other Muslims, like ISIS with the Shia, with the Sunni killing the Shia, or in Afghanistan with the Taliban killing the Hazara. When you look at Islamic terrorism, you'll see first and foremost Muslims are the first victims. But when it spreads beyond and then comes out into the world, we become more familiar with it. I think that's part of the reason is there's a real, tunnel vision now when people look at what happened on October 7th and they think, oh, this is the Palestine-Israel conflict, the same one that we've been dealing with all of these years. Like, they're not really recognizing that that this is Islamic terrorism, and Hamas killing the Jewish people that they killed in Israel is just the first step. They have said this transparently many times over and over and over again, that after they finish killing Jews or Israelis, they're going to move on to Americans and the rest of the world. They want to have a global caliphate. And they're being funded by petrodollars, from Qatar, they're being supported by Qatar, supported by Turkey, funded by Iran. This is a much, much bigger thing than just this group of people in Gaza. And it's also not just them wanting to only kill Israelis because they're angry about blockades on the borders or whatever. This is about them wanting to kill all Jewish people on the planet, period, not just Israelis, not just Zionists, and not just Jewish people either, expand beyond that too, all people that are unwilling to convert to Islam.
Gays?
So, sorry?
Gays?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's, when you were asking me how I relate to the people in Israel right now and how they're feeling, that's been a lot of my work, and a lot of my focus has been against the anti-Semitism and against the homophobia, because those are the two groups that I was so indoctrinated to hate. And I have a lot of atonement to do, I feel like there's I just feel so much well, first of all, I feel a lot of resentment that I was taught to hate, and that I it's a lot of deprogramming that you have to do, and a lot of trying to forgive yourself. And so, yeah, the homophobia in the Islamic world is second only to the anti-Semitism. So, when people in the West now are celebrating Hamas and talking about freedom fighters, revolutionaries, I saw stickers talking about socialists for Palestine. And I'm like, do you have any idea? Like they're the antithesis of whatever value system you have as a socialist. They will throw gay people off of roofs and then have them stoned once they hit the bottom. There's videos of them dragging gay men behind motorcycles, their lifeless bodies just being dragged in the streets of Gaza. And then you've got people on the left supporting them and uplifting them. Let's not even get into how they treat women. But a lot of Marxists have not as bloodthirsty anti-Semitism as the Muslim extremists do, but they also they share that, that anti-Semitism. So that's one of the reasons why they are happy to support each other, So yeah, it's a very big, complicated, oversimplified thing that I'm seeing all the time in the media and in on social media more than anything, really, is just like this oversimplified oppressor versus oppressed, white versus non-white, because Jewish people are white all of a sudden magically, like we forgot suddenly that that's the whole reason why the Holocaust happened, was purely, specifically because they are not white. But now, white people or Jewish people have been deemed white so that they can be deemed the oppressor or the bad guy. It's just simple like TikTok scenario. It makes it easy for the simple minds to understand. And it's not at all a simple topic, and there's so much more to it. But it's been completely oversimplified. And then it's so hard to fight that propaganda that is just like, it just propagates, it just goes so quickly. And my daughter was telling me that there's a certain artist that she follows on Instagram who's in the Ukraine, like she's in Ukraine, and she's like supporting Hamas. And I'm like, it's just, but this girl's like in her 20s and she doesn't know what's going on, so she's just like freedom fighters or whatever. Like she's not even understanding that, Russia is allied with Iran, and like this whole thing like includes her as well. But people just see the little tidbits of, simple information, oversimplified, that just like removes so much context and so much truth. And yeah, it's been that kind of like social media warfare for a very long time. I'm sure you're both familiar with Pollywood, with, all these fake videos that are constantly being shared. And, I think it was Winston Churchill that said that a lie can go halfway around the world before the truth has a chance to put their pants on. It takes a long time to try and pull this back, to unring those bells, to try and explain like, no, that's not actually what happened. So
yep.
I don't know if that answers your question, Evelyn.
Yes, it does. It does. It does. Thank you. So, do you have any information about how Gazans feel about Hamas? How do you feel about Israel, about Jews, the population in Gaza?
It's interesting now because people's feelings are changing, but I'll just go back to in July, there was a poll where it showed about 50-50, about 50% of Gazans were in support of Hamas, and 50% of them were like, just stop with this. We'd like a peaceful two-state solution. Stop saying that you want to eradicate Israel. We're against all of that. But it's important to remember that they are being, controlled by a terrorist organization. So it's like, we didn't hear the voices of the Iranian women for 40 years. We hear them now, finally, burning their hijabs in the streets. But we didn't hear their voices for 40 years because they are under a ruthless regime. And it's very similar in Gaza. Even though they tried a couple times to have protests, one of the most recent ones which they tried a couple times. The most recent one was in 2019, I think. It's called We Want to Live. And they were just talking about being suffocated by Hamas. And what did they do? They got gunned down in the streets. They got arrested. They got tortured. Their families got tortured. Like anybody that was in the streets against Hamas, they would find out who are the members of your family. And they would also be, if they weren't being tortured, they were doing things like this one woman was telling the story of she had a pharmacy, and they would be coming in all the time going, oh, this isn't to code. This isn't to code. You have to pay this fine. And she's like, it is to code, but what are you going to do? You know, when the guys with the guns come in and tell you like, nope, you have to shut down your pharmacy. So all because members of her family were trying to protest against Hamas. So it's like this ripple effect that forces you, like, you really, it's a deterrent, obviously,
Yes.
to keep people in their homes, because even if you think, okay, I'm willing to take this risk, are you also willing to allow everybody in your family to be, you know, at the mercy of this terrorist group? So, you know, there are a lot of people that hate them. There are a lot of people that are against them. It's very difficult to hear their voices. There's a very great campaign called Whispers from Gaza, where they get audio recordings from people in Gaza and they share them, you know, along with animation, because of course we can't see their faces. And they change people's names and things like that. And they tell the story of what it's like to be living there and how much they're suffering. So we do hear from that 50% sometimes. And, you know, even from the remaining 50%, there's going to be a portion of those people that obviously believe in the cause, you know, that believe in eradicating all Jewish people off the planet, killing all Israelis, et cetera, et cetera. But then there's also going to be people that are going to be supporting Hamas because that's where the money is. Hamas got billions and billions of dollars. They've got these huge mansions and their pools, and they live in such luxury. And so people want to be a part of that. They want to be connected to that. They want to be able to, you know, get a piece of that pie. And so it may not even be that they agree with them ideologically, but just pragmatically, they figure, yeah, I'm going to be a Hamas supporter. Or it could be people that are just simply afraid of them, and or people that are unemployed. There's a lot of unemployment. There's a lot of suicide, through the roof suicide rates in Gaza. So people just feeling despondent and depressed and feel like they have nothing else, like just like what happened with the Taliban in Afghanistan. You know, a lot of those boys were joining just because there was nothing else that they could do. So there's a lot of different reasons why there would be Hamas supporters, but you know, let's completely dispel the myth that they are some sort of, you know, freedom fighting group that was like leading the Gazan people to victory or something. No, as I said before, when you've got a terrorist organization, the first victims are the Muslims that are being terrorized by them. You know, before they went to cross the border into Israel and started killing Israelis, they were terrorizing people in Gaza. So yeah, they are a terrorist organization and they only care about themselves. And people can see this now with the videos that are coming out. When they asked one of the Hamas leaders, you know, you've got 500 kilometers of tunnels. Why don't you let the Gazan people go under there and be protected like a bomb shelter? And he said the tunnels aren't for them. They're for us. They're to protect us. They're refugees. They're the UN's problem. They're not our problem. That's how they talk about the people of Gaza. So how can you be, you know, how can you be deluded to think that people that talk like that about the Gazan people are somehow the saviors of the Gazan people? Like they're fine with letting them die. They're fine with shooting their rockets from residences, from hospitals, from mosques, from wherever. They don't care if innocent people get killed. In fact, they probably prefer it because now they can have numbers that they can share with the world, and then more and more billions will come into them in support because people are going to be feeling heartbroken over these lost lives. You know, it's just a strategic thing for them. They don't value human life the way you or I do. You know, like bin Laden has a quote where he said, the West will never win against us because you love life and we love death. He was not kidding. They want to die. They think when they die that they're going to go to heaven and they're going to get their 72 virgins, and they're not concerned about their families dying. They share candies and sweets and desserts when their families die. They celebrate that because this person is a martyr, the shaheed, he's going to go to heaven. You know, it's a completely different mindset
So,
than what we have here in the West.
So, Yasmin, we also saw people in Gaza celebrate the October 7 attack and spitting on a woman that was raped and dragged around in Gaza in some place. Is that then, or is that Hamas? Is that the Gazan regular citizen? What should I? How should I?
I mean, it's
interpret
probably
that?
a mix of both. It's like, because it was 50-50 according to the polls, it's like Gaza is about as united under Hamas as America was under Trump. You know, like
Not very.
it just not very. It depends on who you ask. So all of those horrible, evil people that you saw that were doing that to that young woman, they could have just been regular citizens. They could have been Hamas. It was probably a mix of both. I'm not saying that all Gazan people are good, honest, innocent, pure people. I'm saying that there are some that exist that do want peace, but we don't get to hear their voices, and they don't get to be the ones who are represented. We only get to hear the voices and see the ones that have the money, the power, the microphones, you know, the petrodollars behind them. Yeah, they're the ones that we get to hear from. So this was my dad's biggest problem, right? Like they are the face of the Gazan people. And it's, you know, I don't want to pretend that there aren't a lot of Gazan people that are 100% just as anti-Semitic and bloodthirsty and evil as Hamas, even if they're not even necessarily Hamas members. Of course there are. I have no doubt about that. But it's, you know, I guess at a time like this, it's good news to remember that there are people there that you can link hands with and that would be willing to live peacefully, but it's like such a difficult.
So is a long-lasting peace possible, you think, between Israel and the Palestinians, between Israel and Gaza? And what are essential ingredients for that?
I think that right now Israel has like 20% Arab population. And so there are a lot of Israeli Arabs. There's like Druze and Bedouin and all sorts of different Israeli Arabs that are very loyal to Israel, that even join the IDF. So I don't want to say it's impossible, because I know that it, of course, anything is possible. But it is going to be very, very, very difficult. I think that even asking this question now is like unfair to Israeli people. You know, it's like immediately after World War II, asking them if they want to be neighbors with Germans, you know, like, yeah, sure, only 10% of them are Nazis, but like, you know, it's people are like, the country is bleeding right now. A lot of like the hostages haven't even come home yet. There's so much fear and anxiety, not just in Israel. Let's be honest, the anti-Semitism, the chants and the horrible things that we're seeing are all over the world. Like I was saying before we started recording, I was talking about the string of violence, the anti-Semitic violence that's happening in Canada, including elementary schools being shot up. So yeah, there's a lot of bloodthirsty, vile anti-Semitism happening all over the world that causes Jewish people to feel very worried, very concerned, very scared. All the more reason why Israel needs to exist at times like this is, you know, this is why Israel exists. And so I don't know about that answer to that question, Evelyn. I mean, there are over 50 Muslim majority countries, and even in those ones, there isn't peace. even Muslim and Muslim, or Arab and Arab. So to ask me if they're going to be willing to be good neighbors to Jewish people or to Israel, I don't know. I don't even know. I don't think it's even fair to ask that question right now, because I think it's more important to I think it would be too I can't even say re-traumatizing, because Israelis are in the trauma currently.
Very much.
I don't know how to even express what I'm trying to say, but it's like, we'll deal with that later. Right now let's just get through the current crisis that we're in. I don't know if in the future Israeli people are going to feel comfortable enough with the risk that something like this might ever happen again.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's the name of your podcast, Never Again Is Now, like that was the whole, stay vigilant so that another Holocaust doesn't happen. And then October 7th happened, which is one of the worst attacks on Jewish lives since the Holocaust. And so it's like this, you have to remain vigilant and maintain vigilance. And, yeah, so I don't know if anybody in Israel is ever going to be willing to risk the protection of the country, of the citizens ever again.
This has been an amazing, amazing conversation. And as we're coming to the end, is there anything that you think we haven't covered that you would love to say before we close this episode?
Well, I think we've talked about a lot of darkness, which there's no question. There's a lot of darkness in this world. But I just want to sort of reiterate that there are good people, throughout these countries. And, my organization, Free Hearts, Free Minds, supports people who have renounced Islam, people like me who have renounced the homophobia, the terrorism, the anti-Semitism, and have just walked away from the religion. And, those people aren't being represented either. We're not hearing their voices either. We're not hearing their testimonies either. And so that makes people feel like the problem is greater than it actually is. Like if you start to if we go back to Mr. Rogers, when he was saying that his mom would tell him, look for the helpers, it's like that. There are some helpers out there. When people looked at Iran, they thought, oh, look at all of these people that are screaming death to America, death to Israel, stomping on the Israeli flag and on the American flags. But we didn't know that they all hated their government and that they all loved Israel and that they all loved America. We had no idea because they were being completely suppressed. And now, Iranians are first and foremost, they're on the front lines of supporting Israel in this current conflict. So, we don't know what kind of wonderful things can emerge. I just don't want you ladies or anybody listening who obviously cares about the topic of anti-Semitism. I know that you're feeling really despondent and just it's very sad and depressing, especially what we saw in London the other day, and in Sydney and all over Canada, et cetera, et cetera.
But there was also France. There was also France.
Thank you, Evelyn. That's perfect. I wasn't even thinking about that, but that's the perfect antidote to this. Was in France, there was close to 200,000 people in the streets speaking up against anti-Semitism. Their prime minister was there. Many ex-presidents were there. So, at times in the darkness like this, look to those stories and, feel heartened that love will overcome hate, that, once again, I know, as you have learned and have, you know, experienced many, many times in your history, once again, you will prevail.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this encouraging and inspiring talk. Thank our listeners for listening. Those of you who want to know more about Evelyn or myself or our programs, go to Never Again Is Now podcast. And also, please, whenever you can, speak up against anti-Semitism and all hate.
Thank you, Yasmin, so much.
Thank you both so much.